Imagine a country where women don't just equal men in education and lifespan, but they actually like completely dominate them.
Right, which is not what we usually see.
No, not at all. It's a place where that traditional gender gap that we talk about so much hasn't just been closed, it's actually been completely flipped upside down.
Disperted, yeah.
Exactly. And, if I asked you listening right now to picture where this is happening, you probably picture some uh, I don't know, some futuristic Scandinavian utopia,
Yeah.
right? Or maybe some highly specialized microstate in Western Europe.
That's usually the assumption.
But you would be entirely wrong. Today, we're not looking at Europe at all. We are diving into a comprehensive 33-year benchmark study.
From 1990 all the way to 2023.
Yeah, covering from 1990 to 2023, and it's analyzing human development and gender equality in the Bahamas.
And the data coming out of this study, I mean, it's nothing short of a paradigm shift. It really forces us to completely rethink the trajectory of societal progress.
It totally does. So for you listening, whether you're trying to understand how societies actually evolve beneath the surface or, how education translates into power.
Or how it completely fails to,
Yeah.
in some surprising cases.
Yes, exactly. This deep dive is for you. Because this specific data set, it acts as this incredible crystal ball. It really gives us a glimpse into global trends that are probably coming for the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to unpack this massive statistical anomaly. We want to challenge some of your ingrained assumptions about progress, because we have to ask a really difficult question here. When female human development statistically outpaces male development to this degree, does that represent the ultimate goal of equality?
Or, and this is the big question, are we looking at the emergence of a completely new, hidden structural imbalance?
Right, and to even begin answering that, we have to talk about the number that is just at the absolute center of this study, the anomaly.
The 1.015.
Yes, 1.015. I really want you to keep that number in your mind as we go through this.
It's such a disruptive number, honestly. Because usually when we look at global gender statistics, we are looking at numbers below 1.0.
Like a deficit.
Exactly, a deficit. We're usually measuring how much catching up women still need to do. But the Bahamas has a Gender Development Index, or GDI, of 1.015.
And the GDI measures what
Okay.
exactly? Just the basics.
Yeah, it measures parity in foundational areas like health and education.
Yeah.
And any number over 1.0 means women's achievements in those core areas haven't just matched men, they've actually neutralized male advantages and surpassed them.
Wait. So are you saying the gender gap hasn't been closed here? It's actually been inverted.
Statistically speaking, yes,
Yeah.
it's inverted.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get into the exact mechanisms of how women achieve this incredible surplus in the Bahamas, I really need to understand the playing field. Like, what is the baseline here?
Right, because that 1.015 doesn't mean much if the overall country is struggling.
Exactly. Where does the Bahamas actually sit on the global map of development right now?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the United Nations Development Program categorizes the Bahamas in the very high human development tier.
Very high.
Yeah, that is the highest classification available. To measure this, they use the Human Development Index, which you'll often see referred to in the data as the HDI.
Okay, let me just stop you there, because whenever we start throwing around acronyms like HDI, it can sound a bit, I don't know, like a textbook.
Fair enough.
I actually like to think of the Human Development Index like the dashboard on your car.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, because it doesn't just check your speedometer, right?
Yeah.
Which would be like your nation's income. Because if you have a high income, but your citizens are dying at age 50 and nobody knows how to read.
You're driving a Ferrari with a blown engine.
Exactly. The dashboard is flashing red. So the HDI checks the income, yes, but it also checks the oil, which is public health and life expectancy. And it checks the battery, which is the educational pipeline. It blends all three of those things into one score to tell you if the vehicle of your society is actually healthy.
That is a perfect analogy.
Mm-hmm.
You really need all three systems functioning to keep the car on the road. And looking at that dashboard, in 2023, the Bahamas reached an HDI of 0.820.
0.820. Okay.
Yeah, and out of all the tracked nations globally, that places them 66 in the world.
Okay, so 66, that sounds high, but I need some perspective here. Where does the rest of the world sit right now on that same dashboard?
The world average HDI currently sits at 0.756. So the Bahamas is outperforming the global average by roughly 8.5%.
Wow.
Yeah, they aren't just scraping by. They are a robust, highly developed nation by global standards.
But getting to 0.820, I mean, that wasn't an overnight phenomenon. The sources we're looking at track a 33-year journey starting in 1990, and it tells a story of this really incredible momentum, but also profound, terrifying vulnerability.
Yes, the historical arc is totally crucial here. If we look back to 1990, the Bahamas had an HDI of 0.762, and over the next few decades, it grew steadily.
Just a straight line up.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It was a classic textbook trajectory of a developing nation intentionally solidifying its infrastructure. They were building out public health systems, expanding their educational pipeline, and of course capitalizing on the massive boom in international tourism.
Right.
By 2018, they hit a peak HDI of 0.812.
And then they hit a wall, or I guess more accurately, the wall hit them, because the data shows this massive, sudden resilience test. From 2019 to 2021, the HDI drops from 0.800 down to 0.794.
Right. And it's really critical for us to understand what that drop actually represents in the real world. This isn't just, a random statistical dip or a minor market correction.
Oh.
This drop represents the collision of catastrophic external shocks.
Yeah, we're talking about Hurricane Dorian in 2019. I mean, it wasn't just a storm. It was a Category 5 hurricane that absolutely devastated parts of the islands, completely wiped out physical infrastructure, homes, businesses.
Complete devastation.
And then, before the debris is even cleared, 20 hits. The global COVID-19 pandemic.
Exactly. And you really have to consider what a global pandemic does to an island nation whose economic engine is heavily reliant on tourism.
It just entirely froze the global travel industry.
Total freeze. For a nation like the Bahamas, that is an existential threat. Their economic lifeblood was severed right as the physical infrastructure took a historic battering.
So you have the ultimate stress test. It's like a beautifully engineered bridge. A bridge that suddenly has to handle a Category 5 hurricane battering its supports and a total freeze of the supply chains delivering its maintenance materials at the exact same time.
The bridge bows under the weight.
Right. You can see the metal straining, the concrete cracking. That's what that drop in the HDI to 0.794 looks like in reality. It's job losses.
Yeah.
It's closed schools. It's strained emergency rooms.
But here's what makes the Bahamas so fascinating and why that human capital we were talking about matters so much.
Right.
A storm can destroy a road, right? A pandemic can close a hotel.
Sure.
But if your population is highly educated and highly healthy, if your baseline human development is strong, you have the internal tools to rebuild. You have the educated logistics managers to reroute supply chains. You have the doctors to manage the health crisis.
An underlying engineering of that bridge.
Exactly. The decades invested in the education and health systems allow the bridge to snap back once the immediate pressure lifts.
And the data shows it's snapping back beautifully. By 2022 and 2023, they didn't just recover, they pushed past their 2018 peak, reaching that 0.820 mark.
The baseline resilience of the population was high enough to weather a storm that might have fundamentally fractured a nation with a lower HDI.
Okay, so the bridge as a whole is incredibly strong. It survives the hurricane, it survives the pandemic. But if we take a magnifying glass to the individual pillars supporting this bridge, specifically the men and the women of the Bahamas, we see something truly bizarre.
They aren't carrying the exact same weight.
No. One pillar is built completely differently than the other. So let's finally look closely at that 1.015 inversion. Let's talk about the women.
This is where we dive into the core engine of the female advantage. As we establish, the Gender Development Index, the GDI, is a ratio. It compares female human development directly to male human development.
And the Bahamas sits at 1.015.
Right. And for perspective, the world average is 0.955. So globally, women are still catching up. In the Bahamas, they have overtaken. To understand how they flipped this, we have to look at the two main components of human capital: education and lifespan.
Let's start with the classroom, because the data on expected years of schooling is fascinating. For women in the Bahamas, the expected years of schooling is 12.165 years. For men, it's 11.62 years. And when we look at the mean years of actual schooling, which is the time adults in the population actually spent sitting in a classroom, women are at 12.90 years, while men are at 12.76 years.
Now, To someone listening, a fraction of a year might not sound like a revolution.
Right, it sounds small.
But statistically, across an entire population, it is a profound structural shift. The education pipeline is structurally favoring women. Women are staying in the system longer, they're achieving higher completion rates, and crucially, they're moving into advanced education at higher volumes.
But why? I mean, why is there a difference at all? If boys and girls are sitting side by side in the same schools with the same teachers under the exact same curriculum, why are the boys leaving early?
That's the million-dollar question.
Is it because they're falling through the cracks of the education system, or is it something else? Because my mind immediately goes to the economy of the Bahamas. The tourism, the maritime industry, the construction.
That is the exact sociological tension we need to examine here.
Yeah.
It's a push and pull dynamic. It's highly likely that boys aren't necessarily failing in the traditional sense of dropping out to do nothing.
They're being pulled.
Yes, pulled by economic gravity.
So imagine a high school classroom in Nassau. You have boys and girls. As they reach 16 or 17 years old, the boys might look out the window and see, massive cruise ships docking. They see construction sites building these giant luxury resorts.
Very visible opportunities.
Exactly. They see immediate, highly tangible, physically demanding job opportunities that pay cash right now. They don't need a university degree to start working on the docks or in construction. So the labor market pulls them out of the classroom a semester or a year early.
Precisely. They are responding rationally to a labor market that rewards their physical presence and their labor immediately. But the girls in that same classroom might not see the same immediate open doors in heavy physical labor or maritime work. So what do?
They stay in their seats.
They stay in their seats, they finish the semester, they could graduate high school, they go on to university. They build this massive reservoir of formal human capital.
And while that educational gap is fascinating on its own, when we pair it with the health dimension, the lifespan data, the gap doesn't just widen, it becomes an absolute chasm.
Yeah, it really does.
This is the statistic that completely blew my mind when I was reading through the sources.
The life expectancy gap. Female life expectancy in the Bahamas is 78.187 years. Male life expectancy is 70.906 years.
78.2 versus 70.9, that is a 7.3-year gap.
It is. What stands out to you when you hear that number?
Honestly, it sounds like the men are fighting a war that the women aren't participating in. I mean, 7.3 years is an eternity.
It is massive. Now, we do have to establish a biological baseline here. Globally, the gap between male and female life expectancy is roughly 5 years.
Okay.
Biologically, across almost all populations, women tend to outlive men due to a variety of genetic and hormonal factors.
Okay, so 5 years is the biological default. But the Bahamas has a 7.3-year gap. That means there is an extra 2.3 years of male mortality that basically has nothing to do with the biology. That is entirely sociological.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to your point about the labor market. If young men are leaving school early to enter physically demanding, high-stress, blue-collar industries like construction, maritime, heavy tourism, logistics, they're taking on occupational hazards really early.
They're putting miles on their bodies much sooner.
Yep. And there's also the element of health-seeking behavior, right? It's a well-documented global phenomenon that men in traditional physically demanding roles are culturally conditioned to ignore pain, to skip doctor's appointments, to basically just tough it out.
So if you combine that occupational wear and tear with a reluctance to utilize the very healthcare systems that the country has spent 33 years building.
You lose 2.3 years of life. You trade longevity and advanced education for immediate income. So let's look at the women's side of the ledger.
Right.
They stay in school longer. They get the degrees. They avoid the intense physical toll of the early entry labor market. They utilize the healthcare system. And ultimately, they live almost a decade longer to actually utilize that education.
So women have conquered the classroom, and they are dominating the clinic. They have built this supreme reservoir of human capital. Naturally, you would assume that almost a full extra year of education and an extra 7.3 years of life would translate to supreme economic dominance.
You would think so.
I mean, they should be running everything, right? They have the degrees, they have the time.
You would absolutely assume that. But this is where the data takes a highly unexpected turn. This is where we hit a wall. We enter what we might call the illusions of equality, the paradox of income and power.
Yeah, this is the part of the data that really gives you pause. Because despite this clear, statistically documented education and lifespan deficit among men, the financial reality is completely inverted. The gross national income, or GNI per capita for men in the Bahamas, is $33,132.
And for women,
For women, the GNI per capita is only $28,999.
to put that in a clean percentage, women in the Bahamas earn just 87.5% of what men earn.
It's a massive disconnect. How is that mathematically possible? They are more educated, they live longer, they have higher credentials, and yet they're making significantly less money.
It comes back to the structural reality of the economy. Human capital, which is what you learn and how healthy you are, is not the same thing as structural economic power.
Okay.
Remember the boys who left school early to work in construction or maritime industries?
Right.
Well, by the time the women graduate from university and enter the workforce at 22 or 23, those men have been working for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
They have built networks. They might have started their own contracting businesses. They own the capital in industries that drive the island's economy. The women might be entering middle management administration or the service sector jobs that require degrees but don't necessarily hold the keys to primary capital generation.
Okay, so the women are doing everything right according to the metrics of development, but the economy rewards the specific physical capital and early networking of the men.
Exactly.
And it's not just income where we see this friction. The study provides an entirely separate metric called the Gender Inequality Index, or GII.
Yes. If the GDI measures the achievements in human development, the GII measures the loss in potential due to gender inequalities.
Okay, so it's a negative metric.
Right. It looks at reproductive health, empowerment, and economic status. A lower GII value indicates lower inequality. The Bahamas has a GII value of 0.325.
Which ranks them 84th globally.
Correct.
Wait a minute. Their overall human development ranking, the dashboard we talked about earlier, is 66th in the world. They are a very high human development country. But their gender inequality ranking drops to 84.
Precisely. That gap between 66 and 84th is the exact measurement of the bottleneck. The Bahamas has perfected the human capital pipeline for women. Women are thriving in the clinic and the classroom, but the labor market acts as a severe bottleneck.
Wow.
And an even tighter bottleneck exists in the political arena.
Oh, the political data. I mean, nothing illustrates this bottleneck more starkly. If we look at parliamentary representation in the Bahamas in 2023, the seats are held by a staggering 80% male majority. Only 20% of the parliament is female.
It is a striking disparity,
Huh?
especially when you consider that the women possess the majority of the advanced educational credentials in the country. But if we look historically at the data provided, it actually represents something even more concerning, a regression.
Yes. Looking at the timeline and the sources, female representation in parliament actually hit a high of 26.78% between 2004 and 2006.
Almost 27%.
Right. So 20 years ago, they were closer to 27%. But instead of continuing to climb as women became more and more educated over the last 2 decades, it has steadily slid backward to the 20% it sits at today.
This raises an incredibly important question. As women became more educated over the last 20 years, their political representation actually shrank. How does a society culturally reconcile that?
I mean, how does incumbency work in an island nation? We really have to look at the mechanics of political power. It tells us that educational attainment does not automatically dismantle entrenched power networks. Power is sticky.
Very sticky. The networks that fund political campaigns, the backroom handshakes that appoint corporate boards, these are often built on historical relationships and economic capital that predate the current educational statistics.
So if the men control the primary economic engines, like the construction, the tourism ownership, maritime logistics, they basically control the campaign funding.
Yes.
I think the best way to visualize this entire paradox is to think of it as a glass ceiling versus glass escalator scenario.
Walk me through that.
Well, the women in this data set are climbing this massive, exhausting staircase of education and health maintenance. They were staying in school, getting the degrees, visiting the doctors, doing absolutely everything right by the development metrics. But when they reach the top of that staircase, they hit a glass ceiling. They can see the executive suites, they can see the parliamentary seats, but they can't quite break through because the economic networks are guarding the door.
And the men?
The men take a totally different route. They might jump off the educational staircase early. They take a shorter flight of stairs, pushing their bodies harder in the labor market. But once they step off that shorter staircase, they step onto a glass escalator.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, the early networking, the capital accumulation, the traditional old boys networks. It acts as an escalator that carries them straight to the higher income brackets and the parliamentary seats.
That is an incredibly apt analogy. It perfectly encapsulates the difference between human capital and structural power. The human capital is there, but the structural translation of that capital into institutional power is blocked.
So women have conquered the classroom, but they are blocked from the boardroom and the parliament. But here's where the story takes another massive turn.
It gets more complicated.
Much more. Because even if women did break into parliament tomorrow, even if that 20% representation magically flipped to 50%, they would be inheriting a completely different, almost existential crisis. Because the very economy that is generating all this wealth, the same economy that is causing these gender frictions, is simultaneously sinking the island.
Which brings us to the hidden frictions. We have to look at the ecological debt and the broader inequalities across the entire Bahamian population, not just between men and women.
Right. To understand this, the study introduces 2 more UN metrics, and I promise we will translate the acronym soup for you listening. We have the Inequality Adjusted HDI, or IHDI, and the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, or PHDI.
Let's tackle the IHDI first, the Inequality Adjusted HDI.
Okay, so we established at the very beginning that the raw dashboard score, the Human Development Index, is a very impressive 0.820. But that is an average, and averages can hide a lot of sins. When the statisticians adjust that 0.820 to account for internal inequalities, meaning they look at how evenly the health, education, and wealth are actually distributed among the real people living on the islands, the score absolutely plummets.
It drops significantly.
It drops from 0.820 to 0.670.
That is an 18.29% loss of total human development, simply due to inequality. Think about what that means. It means almost 1/5 of the nation's progress is basically a mirage for a huge portion of the population. The average doesn't represent the reality for the person on the street.
And when we dig into the specific drivers of that 18% loss, what is causing it? Is it health inequality, education inequality?
It is overwhelmingly income inequality. The data shows that income inequality accounts for a massive 37.5% of the inequality factor within the index.
Which perfectly aligns with what we just saw regarding the gender income gap. Wealth is absolutely being generated in the Bahamas. The tourism dollars are flowing in. But that wealth is highly concentrated. It is pooling at the top, likely in the hands of the male-dominated ownership class we just discussed, while the highly educated female workforce in the broader service sector see a fraction of it.
Exactly. The social friction is immense. But honestly, as significant as the social friction is, the metric that truly stops you in your tracks is the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Index, the PHDI.
I call this the ecological debt score. Because if the first metric tells us the cost of social friction, this score tells us the cost of ecological friction. When we factor in the environmental impact of the Bahamas development, their shiny 0.820 HDI drops by 13.17%. It falls to 0.712.
Let's look at the actual physical footprint causing that drop, because the numbers are staggering. The carbon dioxide emissions are 6.07 tons per capita. But the material footprint, which measures the sheer amount of physical raw materials extracted to meet the final consumption demands of the country, is 16.70 tons per capita.
16.7 tons of material for every single person.
Yes. And to contextualize that, we have to look at the global average. Globally, when you adjust for planetary pressures, the average country's HDI drops by about 10.05%.
And the Bahamas drops by 13.17.
Right. So the Bahamas is taxing the planet at a significantly higher rate than the global average just to maintain its standard of living.
Now, I really have to push back here on behalf of the Bahamas.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it actually fair to penalize a small island's human development score for carbon emissions and massive material footprints? Let's think about their economy for a second. Their entire economic survival relies on flying millions of tourists in from the mainland every single year.
That's true.
They have to import fuel to run the resorts. They have to import thousands of tons of concrete to build the hotels. They have to import almost all the luxury food to feed the guests. A local Bahamian citizen is not personally consuming 16.7 tons of material a year. That footprint is the engine of their economy servicing the rest of the world. Why should their human development score take the hit?
You have correctly identified the structural trap, and it is the tragic irony of the island nation. It's not about blame, right? It's about the objective reality of the economic model.
Okay.
The Bahamas is acutely, existentially vulnerable to rising sea levels and climate change. We already talked about the absolute devastation of Hurricane Dorian. They are on the front lines of global warming, yet their only viable economic engine currently relies on a high-emission, high-material footprint model. Heavy tourism, heavy imports, heavy shipping.
So they are trapped.
They are forced to participate in the very ecological degradation that threatens to literally sink their country. They have to burn the fuel to fly the tourists in, to make the money, to build the seawalls, to protect against the rising oceans caused by burning the fuel.
It's like living on an ecological credit card.
I like that.
Yeah, they are enjoying a very high human development lifestyle today. They have the schools, the clinics, the high HDI. But they are putting 13% of the cost of that lifestyle on a high-interest ecological credit card. And the bill is inevitably going to arrive. In fact, with storms like Dorian, the collection agency is already knocking on the door.
And this is exactly why looking at just one number, like the 0.820 HDI or the 1.015 GDI, is never enough. It gives you a false sense of security.
Definitely.
To really understand where the Bahamas sits today, we need to take all these disparate threads and weave them together. We have the amazing female education surplus. We have the male income dominance. We have the sticky political incumbency. We have the severe income inequality. And we have the massive environmental cost.
So how do we bring this down to a human level? How do we synthesize all of this data so it's not just, numbers on a page?
There is one specific indicator in the data that I think serves as the ultimate proxy for how far the Bahamas has actually come, socially speaking. It ties the education and the health data together perfectly. It's the adolescent birth rate.
Yes. The teen birth rate. The study shows that the teen birth rate in the Bahamas is currently 24.6 births per 1,000 women, ages 15 to 19.
Now, to understand why 24.6 is such a massive victory, you have to look at where they started. In 1990, at the beginning of this 33-year study, that figure was 55.9.
Wow. They have more than halved their teen pregnancy rate in 3 decades.
Exactly. And it easily beats the 2023 global average, which sits at 39.1.
So why is this specific metric so important? Like, why focus on teen birth rates when we are talking about macroeconomic human development?
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, teen birth rates are a vital proxy for social equity. They show us the mechanics of the virtuous cycle. The dramatic halving of this rate since 1990 directly correlates with the massive spike in female expected years of schooling we discussed earlier.
It's the ultimate cause and effect. Girls who stay in school don't have early pregnancies. And girls who avoid early pregnancies are able to stay in school.
It creates a feedback loop.
Yeah, they stay in school, they delay childbirth, they enter the workforce with higher credentials, they understand health-seeking behaviors better, and they ultimately increase their life expectancy to that 78.2 years. The 24.6 birth rate is the proof that the 12.9 years of actual schooling is working.
It absolutely is.
So let's synthesize this entire benchmark study. Instead of drawing a literal chart with 4 quadrants, let's ground this in reality. I want you, the listener, to picture a typical 25-year-old Bahamian woman today. Let's call her Maya.
Okay, let's look at Maya's reality through the lens of this 33-year data set.
In terms of global leadership, Maya is a statistical marvel. She lives in a country ranked 14th globally for gender development. She likely has a university degree, out-educating her male peers. She has successfully delayed having children, fitting into that drastically reduced teen birth rate.
She has a life expectancy pushing 80 years old.
Yes. She is the beneficiary of a nation that sits firmly in the very high human development tier. Her foundation is incredibly strong.
But then Maya wakes up and goes to work.
Yeah.
And the reality of the structural shortfalls hits her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She goes to her job in administration or the service sector, and she realizes she is statistically guaranteed to make only 87.5% of what her brother makes. A brother who might have left high school early to work at the docks.
Right.
She looks at the government making decisions about her future, and she sees a parliament that is 80% male, recognizing that the political representation for women like her has actually shrunk since she was a toddler in 2004.
And beyond the gender frictions, she's living in a society where nearly 20% of the nation's human development is swallowed up by extreme income inequality.
And hanging over all of this is the ultimate risk. Maya knows that her beautiful, highly developed island nation is taxing the planet at a rate 33% higher than the global average.
Burning an ecological credit card just to keep the tourists coming.
Yeah. And she knows that the next Hurricane Dorian could arrive any season, threatening to wipe out the very physical ground she stands on. It's a society pulling off absolute miracles in the classroom and the clinic, but stalling out in the boardroom and the atmosphere.
Which leaves us with a very clear playbook. The data doesn't just diagnose the problems. It points toward the solutions. If the Bahamas, and really nations around the world following a similar trajectory, want to ensure long-term stability, there are 3 distinct challenges they must address immediately.
Let's lay them out. Challenge number 1.
First, they must address the male development collapse.
Right. Female success is incredible and should absolutely be celebrated, but leaving men behind in lifespan and education creates a socially unstable future.
It does.
A 7.3-year lifespan gap is a giant red warning light on the dashboard. It means a huge portion of the male population is burning out too fast. You cannot have a structurally sound society if half the population is missing from higher education and dying almost a decade early due to occupational stress and lack of healthcare utilization.
Second, they must break the political ice.
The glass ceiling.
Yes.
Yeah.
The human capital is already there. The education is there. But the representation is not. Having a parliament that is 80% male is an outdated, inefficient metric for a nation that possesses this level of female expertise in education.
It really is.
The institutional glass ceiling needs to be shattered so that governance actually reflects the capabilities of the population. You need those educated women in the room where the decisions are made.
And that leads perfectly into the third challenge, the green transition. Sustaining an HDI of 0.820, boasting about having very high human development, it all means absolutely nothing if the planetary pressure continues to erode the physical island itself.
Exactly.
They have to find a way to decouple their economic survival from high-emission imports and ecologically damaging megatourism models.
It is a profound, almost impossibly difficult transition to make. But the silver lining of this entire data set is that it proves they have the human capital to engineer those solutions. The women and men of the Bahamas had the education and the resilience to figure this out if the structural bottlenecks are removed.
It really forces you to step back and look at the big picture. So for you listening, I want you to look at this data from the Bahamas and ask yourself about your own society. We have spent decades viewing gender equality as a seesaw.
Right, like a zero-sum game.
Exactly. We've been conditioned to assume that if we lift one side up, the other side must inherently lower. We see a number like 1.015 where women pull ahead, and we immediately wonder if things have tipped too far, if the seesaw has broken.
It's a natural assumption based on how we usually talk about this.
But what if true equality isn't a seesaw at all? What if it's a shared foundation? Because the lesson of the Bahamas is clear. If a nation perfectly balances its human capital, educating everyone brilliantly, extending lifespans, but ignores the planetary costs and allows historical, structural power gaps to remain entrenched, eventually the entire playground sinks. Something for you to think about until our next deep dive.